Hi, guys. Welcome to the Lit Mag Lab podcast. This is Vevna Forrow. Yeah, let's get started. All right. So, on the past podcast episode, I was discussing things to do when your work keeps getting rejected by literary magazines, presses, journals, or by, major publishers out there. It is always a good idea to, take matters into your own hands, and start publishing your own work and getting it out there gradually in tidbits, essentially. You can always, go back and revamp your work, right? And revise it, right? You can always do that. And, not everyone's going to give you a yes. That's how life works, right? There are times where you will absolutely get a series of no's and it'll make you feel really cruddy. But so many artists and writers all in your situation, same boat. We're all in the same boat oftentimes. So the whole aspect of writing and creating is to just keep sharing, to get it out there, to get your words out there, especially as a writer and artist, your artwork, start sharing it out there, because if it just sits in your room, in the attic somewhere, in a box, right? No one's ever going to really know about it, and it's going to suck, right? You'll be like, what if I had shared it? Or what if I had not let all of that work just collect dust, way back when, 20 years ago, right? It is so important to take your work and do something with it, very positive, right? And to, share it with others, It doesn't have to be a huge audience. It doesn't have to be a whole lot. It could be a very small group of friends, close friends, family even. You start small, then you start publishing it yourself, self-publication. There's so many routes nowadays, thanks to technology, that you can go and do. Anyways, in this podcast, I want to give some tips, for how do you get, accepted into literary journals and magazines? Like, what are some things to take in consideration to try and really get an acceptance and do the best you can, yeah? So personally, guys, I'll share, I haven't been published in hundreds upon hundreds of literary magazines or journals. I just run one and a press, and also I would say I've been published in about 8 places or 8 publication spaces. A mix of print and online, and some spoken word has gotten published in the past. So I think what made those get acceptances versus my other 100 tries to other places was, I stopped submitting so much random poetry per se, poetry that just came off the top of my head, but was more so not really directed at the focus of the Literary Journal magazine, right? Because some focus on, or, have various themes, right? There are some lit mags and journals that are for moms, for others who have nothing but poetry focusing on the theme of abandonment, or, environmental impact poetry, or even the sea or nature, or so many other themes and focuses of each lit mag and journal. At Dippity, for example, we don't always have themed issues, and we're actually in the midst of doing a sort of relaunch, actually. But, some journals, lit mags, often throughout the year have themed calls, or sometimes they have unthemed calls. So you really have to read the guidelines very carefully. I'd always recommend reading the guidelines 2-3 times. Again, make sure you've not missed anything, because oftentimes rejections and declines happen because poets simply do not read the guidelines very carefully. There are some places that actually do accept previously published work, but there are not a ton out there per se. There are more so times you'll see places asking for work that's never been seen before, previously unpublished work, right? So you have to read whether they're asking for work that, or allowing work that has appeared elsewhere, as long as you're crediting that past place and mentioning that and being upfront with it, or not. Some places totally do not accept any work that's been published elsewhere. And oftentimes, we catch that, right, through especially online publications and things like that. So you really have to pay attention, right? Something very small could disqualify you from a contest or anything like that. I would also say that my publications, the ones that got accepted, were some of the poems where I was more vulnerable, and open, versus the other times, right? And even so this year I'd share, it's been more so comedy poetry getting accepted, which is, if you're going to submit to a comedy lit mag or journal, right, or online publication, right, you can't submit anything sad, right? So really take consideration, right? Think about what you're submitting to a place. You have to read back or look through what are they publishing, right? You have to get to know the magazine or journal or the place you're considering as a home for your work. Of course, it's totally possible to get an acceptance and not really know much about a place you're submitting to, but very rare, I'd say. It is very helpful when you read through some of the poems in the past, look at their social media feeds of what they're publishing and things like that, and really get into contact with some of the work, your eyes on it that's been published in the past. And I think that's so helpful and beneficial. Now, some places have everything paywalled and nothing online, because some places just do solely print issues and things like that, right? So, you may end up purchasing some issues and seeing what they published or what have they published in the past, and go from there. Then try submitting to them after, really getting understanding of what they're looking for. It helps. It absolutely does. There are some places that perform more abstract poetry or visual poetry, things like that. So the beauty of, the community space and everything is that there are so many opportunities in lit mags and journals out there. You're bound to come across one that fits with something you love. There used to be one out there that did nothing but karate and martial art poetry, for example. There may still be other ones out there. Recently, I came across, I will share some names on, in the future, do a series or something of some faves and stuff. But there are ones out there that do car poetry even, and all kinds. It's just so amazing. And of course, food poetry I've seen. Even I'm a huge fan of food poetry from time to time, right? So it's a really cool space, the community of lit mags, journals, and presses. I love seeing the creativity of each lit mag and journal and just what they do with the poetry, and some of the types of print publications. Again, it's just really phenomenal work. So yeah, most importantly, again, make sure you're vulnerable. Make sure when you're writing, I think what helps me when I'm writing is, again, you could totally write something that's off the top of your head, but I think sometimes when we go through very tough situations or events in our life, we feel uncomfortable, we might feel embarrassed sharing those things, right? But I think when you let go a little bit and you just let go fully even and start sharing your work out there, it becomes less painful to do so, to share. You can't just put words on the page saying, again, like the sky was blue, right? That's so obvious. But think about, like that sentence I just said, something so common, right? Go much further than that. Don't just do general statements. In poetry, oftentimes I see in some submissions or some poets starting out, they do general statements and thoughts, or what they do unnecessary line breaks and try to do some, shape with their work. But all honestly, if you remove all of those shape and, breaks and lines and spaces and look at just the words, right, and line them up, right, what is left? It's the impact there that we're really looking for, not per se the format. Yeah, so concrete poetry is really cool, and shape poetry. But if you're going to do, for example, a poem or a narrative one about a fishing trip with your folks, the poem does not have to be in the shape of a fish. Although that's pretty cool, it does not have to do that, And yeah, again, I'll share with you guys, have done shape poetry. I think the only one I did a couple others, but was a hammerhead shark one that was pretty memorable. And I think it was about like a cougar lady and some dude. I don't know, it was some rando poem about that, like something about an older woman out to get younger dudes and stuff. I'm sorry if I'm making you laugh, but I wrote all kinds of poems like that in the past, but so much rhymes and rando stuff. I was just like trying to take my mind off of some rather, traumatic events physically. So That happens. Sometimes we just write for fun. So I have stuff like that out there, but some of my poetry is more serious and darker in nature and stuff. And yeah, so I don't always write comical poems, but more recently I have. Again, I've started doing that. So, and have actually gotten, 4 poem acceptances with my comedy poetry. And yeah, but I want to go back to something I said earlier. So, when you're submitting to a lit mag or journal, I think it's so important that in most cases you are raw and honest in your writing, and you'll see a much greater impact or difference in your work when you're doing that. I said something earlier too, poetry off the top of your head perhaps won't necessarily be accepted. What I meant by that is, it's not as revised or fine-tuned, right? So oftentimes when I've submitted poetry that was just like off the top of my head, sometimes it has, got accepted where I just let go and just submit the first lines I ever wrote. I don't edit it at all. Sometimes the raw and edited, versions are accepted. They are. I've had cases, especially of spoken word. I've seen that, and yeah, so if the poem gets rejected by one place, what you can do, go back, take some time away from it, go back to it and revise it. Just revise it, a few lines of it, and see. I've made slight revisions to poems that got rejected, submitted them elsewhere, and, there were acceptances from that, But sometimes you'll get, again, a series of, declines, right, back to back to back on the same poem. And from there, again, I'd highly suggest, as I mentioned in a past episode, to maybe try to get feedback from close friends in the writing community that you trust and everything, or use the feedback options that some of these lit mags and journals offer. Yeah, some of them have free feedback windows, some of them don't, but it may be worth it, if you want to grow as a writer, to get that feedback or to attend some of the writer workshops that some poets host or have. Definitely could help you. So, yeah, again, you have to really read the magazine, whether it be online or print, with print-only magazines, it's a little bit tougher to find examples. But again, you can go out to social media, see what other poets have tagged them. Usually there are photos of their poems, and you can read back parts of the issue. And even online, I've come across some really cool Tumblr blogs and some other sites that showcase nothing but lit mags, right? There was this one cool one called Lit Mag Lunch, yeah. And I came across online. I originally was going to name this podcast Lit Mag Lunch, but because of that Tumblr blog, I decided not to go that route. It was really cool what she was doing, by the way. She was photographing the lit mag and journal, and she was also showcasing what she was eating for lunch at the same time. I think it was Patricia Colleen Murphy. I think that was her name. I could be wrong, but I think she had the Superstition review a while back, and it ran from like the Lit Mag Lunch Tumblr. I think it goes from 2012 to 2020. So anyways, I thought it was such a cool thing, what she was doing, the lit mags and her lunch for the day, because you can see just how cool like the various lit mags are, the names, the style of them. I think that's really cool to see back to back to back like that. And I think there are a couple other places that do that too on social media. Some poets just share every lit mag they've purchased, and some YouTube channels are out there. You'll find some lit mags and journals and some videos that way too. But yeah, the same thing applies for like if you ever were applying for a job, right? If you don't know much about the company or anything, the chances are you're not going to get the job if you know nothing about it, right? You have to do research on it, and that goes for lit mags and journals and presses, right? You have to get to know the place you're submitting to or sending anything to, because it would be very, very rare for acceptance to go through for a lit mag or journal you've never read before, right? But it can happen, right? It can happen, but yeah. get the vibe of the Lit Mag Journal, the types of work they publish, the themes they're publishing, because some publish, again, very specific themes. Recently online, I was finding some that were doing nothing but car poetry. I thought that was so cool. And there were, again, some that do nothing but abandonment type poems, poems on horror, so nightmares even, or scary stuff, sci-fi. There are quite a few sci-fi, flash fiction places, short stories, and divorce poetry, stuff like that, relationship poetry, lovey-dovey poetry, nothing but love poems, right? And I think it's fun to see themed calls again, but oftentimes I see poets, they really love general unthemed calls. Now, in the past podcast episode, I also mentioned, that you can totally publish your poetry yourself if it doesn't go anywhere, with lit mags or journals in terms of acceptances. But the thing to keep in mind is some of these lit mags, journals, and presses do accept previously published work. So that is cool. Some of them even pay you for, previously published work if they choose to accept it. Not all of them do. There are very few. There are more times, again, others asking for work that's never been seen before, as I mentioned. But that's nice. I think that's really cool. There are places that do permit, the publication of poems that have been out on your social media, personal blogs. They have some that do that. And I've oftentimes seen that more so with chapbook publication places and presses. If you purchase a chapbook, some places you'll see, there'll be a small little line saying this poem was originally published by this lit mag or journal, the name of it there, and, the year typically. So, it's always good to be upfront if your work has been published before elsewhere. Never, conceal that or hide that. Oftentimes I catch poems that were submitted to our, our previously unpublished category, but we scan them and we put them through a checker, things like that. And, we oftentimes find them online or published elsewhere or in other collections, with identical names and things like that they've done in the past. Just be honest about it. If you're submitting work that's been published before and they are letting you do that, that's totally okay. If they're not, then don't, do that, right? Submit something new, create something from scratch all over again and try it. Yeah. So I always find it helps to take some time to, carefully read the Lit Mag or Journal, just a couple of recent issues and past ones. And it does help. It does. So definitely do that. And when you're writing your poem, I would say the times I got acceptances, I mentioned this, but I'm just want to repeat this a little bit further and go into it. I had poems accepted that were honest and tied back to loved ones, family members. I've had poems that I tied back to, my grandparents, my folks, my dad even, and things like that. And some underlying feelings and things that, were all based on true events and things tied in with some, sometimes with some humor and sometimes not with any humor at all. So, I think you really have to look at, moments of your life that were perhaps the hardest or not necessarily always the worst moments. They could be really beautiful moments too. But use those moments and write poems tied to those events in your life and see, the results of that. Of course, not all lit mags and journals are going to, publish moment poetry or poems inspired by various events in your life and stuff. But I've seen quite a few poems that were made it all the way were actually ones that were tied back to, things like that, memories and actual events and things like that. Of course, I leave out names and stuff, but I think it is really cool to see that. And what else? So when you're submitting to a lit mag in journal, the thing about simultaneous submissions, I just want to note this. So you want to be on top of that. Like if you're going to submit the same poem to multiple places, right? You want to have that tracked. Again, like most poets just using a color-coded Excel spreadsheet. There are some great online trackers there that I've seen recently that you can use too if you just do a couple searches besides Chill Subs and the other directory trackers I mentioned in the past episode. And yeah, I think that's so helpful because you can lose track of, poems that got accepted quite easily over time and, where they've been placed. So you really have to stay organized to stay on top of that. It does help. And of course, some places have you withdraw a poem if it has been, accepted by another place. Some places say don't withdraw it right away, let us know, and then we'll go from there. So it depends. You have to read the guidelines and, their terms and publication, guidelines, everything, yeah. So, yeah, there are so many other lit magazine journals, theme-wise or subject matter-wise I could go into, but you're always bound to find something that sort of fits with something you really love in life. There are a lot of fun ones out there, absolutely. I think one that a lot of others know, I'll just give the name on this one here, Taco Bell Quarterly. That name always, brings a smile to my face. And there are several other ones and really cool. So, yeah. And, that's all I'd recommend. So really just, when you're writing, let go, write, you can write the stuff off the top of your head, but make sure you comb through it a couple times before you submit that. And just see what happens, right? You have to try usually different places. I ended up submitting, for example, 3 poems to one place. One poem was accepted. Then I took those 2 declined poems, cleaned them up a little bit, just very few words and a typo here and there, submitted it to another place. Those 2 poems that had been rejected got accepted somewhere else, and even a third new one that I had written too. So, yeah, so that was cool. So, yeah, you just got to keep trying, you'll eventually, I'm sure, bound to find a home for your work, whether you publish it yourself or you actually find a lit mag or journal or press out there. And really consider, when you're doing especially chapbook submissions, I'd say, make sure it's cohesive, right? And has a central focus, right? And poetry, the meaning behind it is sometimes not always apparent or clear to the reader. It could have multiple meanings, but think about what the end goal of your poem was, right? Was it to make someone laugh? Was it to, have a dedication to someone, a lost loved one, or, or to share a lesson with others and things like that. So like there's purpose poetry, right? There's a purpose to writing. Science fiction and other stories, you really have to think about bite-sized impact, right? Things where there's a very short word count. And same thing with places that have line requirements, like very short line requirements. You have to stay within that, or outright decline it if you go over the word count or the amount of lines you can have, on a page. So in a single poem. So yeah, oftentimes I'll just share, I see a lot of poets, writers, just not enough surprising per se in like short stories, right? We don't want to see things that are common or very obvious in terms of statements and things like that. That is where you'll just leave the reader, the Lit Mag Journal Press, just not, excited, right? We want to see things that are unexpected, or that, sometimes I've seen poets submit things that, just took my breath away in a sense, that were so beautifully written, right? And sometimes I see poems that are so fun and so cool that, they are memorable in that case, or so lovely, right? That, melt your heart or just brighten your day. So you really have to think again about the focus of your poem, whether it be a chapbook or a submission. If you're submitting a set of poems, right? I'd always recommend, if a place is saying you can submit up to 5 poems, up to 10 poems. Don't just submit one poem to them, right? Go ahead and submit the max amount of poems to them, especially, right? That is something I will reiterate. I used to just submit one here, one there, but then I started, doing sets if they allowed it, up to 3, up to 5, up to 10. Some places do, allow you to submit several pages of poems, or some just say, up to 3 or just 1. You really have to read those guidelines, but take advantage of that. If they're saying you can submit that many, go for it. And I think that is really beneficial because then, if they don't like the first 5 poems, maybe they're bound to like the next 5 poems if they allow up to 10 poems, right? There's a higher probability of an acceptance there because of the amount of poems you can submit. But not necessarily, right? They can outright decline all of them. But I'm just saying that you should absolutely take advantage of that maximum amount of poems that they've specified, or, however many short stories they allow. Don't just always submit one. But it's totally possible, that if you submit just one, it's possible that they really love that submission and still, might accept it, or may. Really depends. So, yeah. I think that's all. I just wanted to share some of the things I take in consideration when, writing poems myself and, getting acceptances, what I felt, led up to the acceptance, and some tips and things I see for, poems getting declined often through, our submission windows and things like that. Always double check the categories you're submitting to, the buckets, and, sometimes we see poets submit to the wrong place, and things like that. So really be mindful about that. We do concealed anonymous reads rounds, and so you'll always want to make sure if the place is doing that, don't put your name or information in there at all, because it really is something we just want to focus on your work, at Dippity per se. And I know other places too. I know a few other places actually do look at your poetry cover letter, your resume per se in the poetry world, and things like that. But I think it's better to conceal that and to just focus on the writing at hand in front of us, and then, confirm and verify all that afterwards, right? Bios and stuff, right? So, yeah, I hope this episode helped you. So, whether you be writing a chapbook, a poem, or a story or essay, whatever it may be, totally think about, the impact you want to have on the reader, and just try to be as honest and raw as possible in your work. I'd highly recommend that always. And I know it can be scary if you're starting out writing for the first time, or you're trying to perhaps tell something that was pretty tough, right? Like a thing you've gone through, event in your life, and it's hard to put that into words, but because you're constantly thinking of, I wonder if this makes sense. I wonder if what others will think about me if I write this. Don't worry so much about all of that. Just get it on the page, comb through it, get feedback from maybe very close, trusted friends, your best friends, some loved ones even. Of course, not everyone's loved ones like poetry, of course. So again, poets in the community have asked me for feedback and things like that, and I've always given my honest thoughts, as much as possible, even through Dippity voice feedback as much as possible. So, yeah, a lot of places offer a feedback option. You can usually find those in, Discover pages, and Submittable especially has, I've seen quite a few there in their Discover page, and a few other places have directories and search directories like that, Discover opportunities and stuff you can find. But usually, you can just do some keyword searches and you can find that too. Takes some time, but totally possible. And yeah, quite a few places do have that option for feedback and getting the thoughts of the editorial team. So I think that's so beneficial again. Yeah, so I think I covered everything. I repeated a couple points because I just wanted to, get those across really and emphasize those. Yeah. So submit away, submit away. If you haven't started submitting to Lit Magazine Press, try it, and just pay no mind. Like, I think when I'm submitting to places, when I started off, I was like, just writing all kinds of poems. I wasn't really having a focus in them, and over the last few years, my poems have been more focused with a direct purpose and direct tie back to something in my life. Not all of them. A lot of my earlier ones, not at all like that. They were all themed, though, for sure. I had like chess poetry, collection on, I think motel poetry or stuff. I wasn't in a motel, but I like doing, back then I liked doing a lot of fictional fun writes, and sometimes those are fun, right? Just, letting go and stuff. But absolutely, you need to think about the end goal with your poem or your story or your essay, the main point of it. I usually start off, and I know I'm going over the time I usually do a little bit, or nearing 25-ish minutes, but I often start off with the title of my poem, always, and then I just start writing. Getting the title down first always helps me, with the development of the poem. Of course, I've written tidbits of things, first without the title, and then I've thought about the title and then built from that, but very rarely. The title is often the focus point. It's the first thing the reader or the Lit Mag Journal Press sees, right? Even of your collection and stuff. So you really have to take time and consider the title. Of course, some places allow you to change the title afterwards, and make changes to it, but that is the first thing that hits their eyes. So you really have to think about that too. Of course, there are some untitled poems there, but I think it's really cool that we can come up with almost like our own movie titles to our poems, right? Basically, our own film poems, movie titles, right? Even do some spin-offs of some fun movie titles. I've seen poets do that from time to time. So you can really have a lot of fun with your title as a starting point and go from there. So absolutely take some time to come up with a very strong title. Don't just call it, you could, but don't just call it Blue, right? The Blue poem, right? Don't just call it that. You could. There are poems out there, they're just one word. That's not a huge problem. Really, again, we're looking at the core part of the poem, right? The meat of it, the lines. But a title is the starting point. It's the first thing we really look at, right? What is the poem titled? If the title is not matching the content of the poem, that's going to cause confusion, right, for the reader. And so really think about that too. So yeah, I hope these were helpful tips. I'm not sure the next episode I might cover, or the next few, some of the things, what it's like on a Lit Mag journal team, and eventually I might do an episode on how to start your own Lit Mag journal, or press if you like. And yeah, so a couple different topics upcoming, and I'll think of some others. So take care and have awesome days ahead. Yeah. P.S. guys, and sorry, this ended up being way longer than I anticipated, 30 plus minutes or so. So yeah, I just want to say something I used to do quite a bit that I stopped doing was I was too quick to withdraw my pieces that I submitted, way too early, I felt. So once you submit, every place has a certain time frame where you'll hear back from them, expected or estimated. My advice to you is to wait it out, wait it out. There are times where I never heard back from a place, and in those cases, right, they usually have contact information. You can reach out to them and say, hi, it's been past the estimated time stated on your site and guidelines. I'm just checking the status of my submission. Of course, some places have anonymous and concealed submissions, but they should have, someone on the team who has the level of access to verify your submission if it wasn't via email, right? Especially if your submission was via email, things tend to get lost in a shuffle. So yeah, if it's beyond the time that they said, you can always follow up with them. A lot of places have their contact information or a help desk of some sort that you can reach out to, or even a Discord chat. So yeah, wait it out, and don't be so quick to withdraw your pieces or to get, it's hard to wait totally. There's a anticipation, like, is it going to be accepted? Is it going to be declined? That whole thing. And yeah. So I would also say a few more tips here. Make sure, wherever you're writing, is an environment where you feel comfortable, right? It's quiet, not necessarily. You could be in a busy environment And it could actually inspire a poem, totally. If you were on like a lunch break at work and you were writing a poem based on that day, totally, if that works for you. But I've seen writers sort of block out times, each week or across the month of when they submit, and prepare for certain windows, because very specific windows exist for some lit mags regularly throughout the year in journals and presses. So yeah, I know some write in front of the TV like me, or, if you're going to be in your living room or your bedroom or a tree house even, whichever place you want to write, your backyard, as long as it's somewhere you feel comfortable, it's quiet, typically I think a lot of people like writing in quiet environments, just like solo. Technically you could form a group of, poets, or write at a poetry club per se, or a spoken word open mic event even, or listen to music. I know a lot of poets, have a playlist ready to go when they're about to write their poems, for submitting or to get, amped up. It's like a whole thing, everyone has their routines for preparing to write or after, submitting, or things to just, for some, it can be stressful, right? The whole process. But honestly, it should be fun, submitting to lit mags and journals and presses. It shouldn't be stressful or chaotic, you just got to relax, once it's submitted, just wait and see what happens and follow up if it goes beyond. Lastly, again, as an editor of a lit mag and, press myself, always, we look for creativity, right? That is absolutely so, just because, one place again declines, it doesn't mean your poem wasn't creative enough for them. Again, it could be something it totally doesn't fall in the guidelines of what they're looking for, or the theme, or they feel it's not close enough to, whatever they were looking for in that window. So it's not necessarily always that. Again, you don't always need to do, shape poems and very, different things with your line breaks. Sometimes it's best just to have a straight up simple poem, straight up lines, just like all, line and some line breaks. It all depends. Or you could have, some poems without line breaks. It all depends on, the flow. But always pay attention to, your capitalization. And, I've seen cases and submissions where, poets have had nothing but curse words in every line or even in the title. So, if you're going to, we do allow, by the way, at Dippy, like cursing and stuff like that, very brief. But if you're going to include swearing or curse words, it has to add value to the poem, or it has to fit into it. It can't just be like cursing every line is a bit much, right? And the title, even back to back to back words like that, that's yeah. When you're capitalizing something, think of it, often it can be seen as shouting, or, you're trying to emphasize something, obviously, but you should be very mindful about what you lowercase, what you capitalize. Is it following a certain style of poetry, right? If you're outright saying this is this style of poetry and it doesn't match that, and we come across that, then, that's going to affect your submission, right? Whether it probably won't make it if it's not actually following the style or form or specific, a structure of that type of poem or style. A good example is there, various styles of Japanese poetry, haikus. We have processed and reviewed haikus from time to time. There are several others out there. I'm not going to name them all, but I challenge you to dabble into all the other styles of poetry. There's so many. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Actually, I should look that up. I should look up what that is. And so I'll get back to you on that in the next episode. And so it's very cool how many lit mags, journals, and presses there are. Chill Subs is a great place. Again, Substack, there are lists out there. Medium has a whole population of lit mags and journals as well. Chill Subs has a tracker of that. I think it was showing like almost somewhere between 300 to 500, almost in that range of, places on Medium that publish and take submissions, but they have the guidelines on their site, some of them. So yeah, you just have to search, and you're bound to, again, find a place for your work to try. Main thing is to try. You typically won't get an acceptance right off the bat, but if you do, again, that's awesome. So take care, and sorry if you heard some dog barking in the back of this episode, but I just wanted to add this PS note, yeah.